Ah, it's time for Call You and Yours with Julian Warwicker in Salford.
Hello, good afternoon. Is Britain becoming more religious? The Church of England has released figures today which show more of us went to a Christmas church service in 2011 than did the year before, and there was also an increase in child and adult baptisms. Weekly attendance at church services fell very marginally, which the Church has described as a sign of growing stability after years of much bigger drops. The Right Reverend Graham James, Bishop of Norwich, says there's a, quote, quiet confidence underlying these figures. Well, today we'll try to get a picture of Britain's attitude to religion. How, for example, do the figures I just mentioned square with the 2011 census findings? There, the percentage of people who ticked the box marked no religion rose to 24.7% from 14.6% 10 years earlier. Then there are the followers of other faiths. Again, according to the census, followers of Islam rose by over 1 million in that 10-year period. There were rises too in the numbers following Hinduism, Sikhism and Buddhism. Figures for followers of Judaism remained almost unchanged. And what does being religious mean? Is it about a certainty of faith where the God you follow is the main source of authority in your life? Is it about spiritual activities as much as religious ones? Is it about a sense of belonging, about a culture? And if you ticked the no religion box when completing the census, are you dismissing all of the above or acknowledging that some of it is still important to the British way of life? 03700 100 444 is the phone number. A call will cost you the same as dialling an 01 or an 02 number. You can email you and yours at bbc.co.uk. You can text to 84844, and if you do that, we'll charge you your standard operator message rate, and we may call you back on that number. Or you can tweet at Radio 4 using the hashtag #YouAndYours. Plenty of calls to come. First, I'm going to talk to Paul Butler, who's Lord Bishop of Sutherland, Nottingham. His is the diocese which saw the highest rise in weekly attendances, according to those Church of England figures, up 10.7%. Sunday attendances there were up 8.8%, again the highest in the country. Interestingly, if we look at the geographical breakdown of weekly attendances, the steepest fall was in Canterbury. Bishop Paul, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What are you doing in Sutherland, Nottingham that isn't happening in Canterbury?
Well, I think we're doing stuff that is happening in Canterbury as well, and there's all sorts of great stuff going on in the parishes. That's where all the work is being done really well, and that's where the growth happens.
What does great stuff mean?
Well, we've got lots of examples of churches who are doing fresh ways of worship through things like Messy Church, which is where it's designed for the whole family to come together. There's lots of craft and activities, but it's all centred around Bible stories and some worship together. The way in which our buildings are being used for more community engagement. One of the things that, in talking with my clergy, where they are seeing growth is actually the community engagement is a very critical factor. So it's not just about people coming to church, it's about the church community getting stuck into its local community and seeking to serve it however it can.
How much is it about the new arrivals having a strong faith in God?
People come into church with a whole range of levels of faith. Levels of faith is a slightly strange phrase, but some people will come with a very kind of uncertain question. People come not sure whether they believe in God at all, but they still come to church to find out more about the God that they think may or may not be there. Others arrive with quite convinced faith already, but not formed in any way. One of the things that we are seeing is levels of kind of knowledge of the Bible and the historic background of Christian teaching are lower than they used to be. So there's a lot of work being done by clergy and lay leaders in helping people understand the faith through things like Alpha courses and Emmaus courses and so on.
What of those census figures? There are far more people of no religion than there used to be. How does that square with what you have just described?
We seem to be seeing kind of different trends going, don't we? Here we have an arrest in the decline of Church of England attendance, and in some cases some real growth occurring, at the same time as more people perhaps more overtly expressing a belief in atheism or certainly agnosticism.
More able to be honest, perhaps, because they
so.
feel they were able to, whereas before it wouldn't have been deemed respectable to have said that.
I think that's right. I think part of it is actually there is a more openness to expressing those beliefs, and yet at the same time, people still actually recognise, I think, something of the history of the Christian faith, the role of the church through our history, and people want to recognise that and engage with it. So even people who would describe themselves as atheists will say, actually, we value the history and we value what the church has always stood for, and even if we've got some questions about the beliefs about God, actually the values that you're espousing and teaching are really important to us.
Yeah, I mean, we've had several calls and emails to that effect. I mean, just a final thought on that. How much are you prepared to dilute the message, if you like, to welcome more people in? So if people come along and say it's about the culture, it's about a belonging, it's about the fact that we like a nice hymn, does that matter?
Interestingly, I would say that the churches in my diocese that have seen the most significant growth would probably be those who are most clearly not diluting the message. They're actually but they are presenting the story of Jesus very clearly in ways which engage people and help people see how it still connects with their daily lives. So I don't think it's our job to dilute the message at all. I think it's our job to be very clear about it.
Thank you for coming on.
No, my pleasure.
Paul Butler, Lord Bishop of Southwell and Nottingham. Let's hear some reaction to that from callers. Susan Killicks in Sevenoaks in Kent. Susan, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Julian. Can I just correct you? I'm actually from Tunbridge in Kent.
My apologies. I got Kent bit right, but the town wrong. Press on. What would you like to say?
I'd like to say that I go to St Stephen's here in Tunbridge, and that church offers us so much. There is a good attitude from the clergy. They're wonderful. They lead us forward. It's an open church, an informal church, and I say informal. And they also work in the community. There is a lot going on there all the time. And I've checked this morning just to make sure that I'm giving the right figures. And on average, on a Sunday morning, there are 300 attendees. I have off and on always gone to St Stephen's, and I have to say that's far more than when I was a lot younger. And I'm in my mid-60s.
You've talked about the good works.
Yes.
Is it not fair to put back to you the idea that there are plenty of organisations that do, quote, good works that have nothing to do with Christianity or indeed any other faith at all? So what's the difference?
I think it's a question of attitude. We don't actually preach to the people. For instance, we've got the Work Matters course for those who are unemployed wanting to get back into work. There aren't many of those courses run locally, to be honest. Also, there's an open church on a Tuesday where people can just go in, sit down and talk to someone. And there are people with problems. Speaking to the right people really does help them.
Susan, thank you. Let me bring Ali in Reading from a different religious perspective, but I think also talking about the work that you do because of your faith. Is that fair?
Yes, Julian.
Tell me more.
Okay, well, as a Muslim, we believe that we sort of know the truth about why we're here, the reality. And as a result, it becomes a duty on us to try to spread this knowledge, not forcing anyone to accept it, just to give the knowledge out. And so we do I used to regular every week on Saturdays, for example, in Reading Market and other places at schools and stuff like that. And we encounter different people with different views, from one extreme to another. And so I was actually a bit unsure whether there really was an increase in religiosity in the UK. I mean, from what I saw, I didn't notice any increase.
So you've encountered a fair few sceptics, is what you're getting at?
Yeah, a lot of people. I didn't see an increase in people wanting to know about religion. I mean, there is some people. There are some people, a minority maybe, but you have extremes from people who wanted. One example, someone, he was so angry about God and he wanted to curse God and things like that. Very, very full of hate towards God. And you have another extreme of someone who is completely different. He's sort of he wants to know God. And he wants to come closer to God. And you have a middle person who, when you tell him about it, you say, well, for example, no one can know. This is something that people cannot know, even though there are people in history who knew the truth and lived on it and died on it, and even today and in the future, I suspect as well.
OK, Ali, thanks for the call. Ali in Reading. Gus Logan's in North Berwick. Gus, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You attend the church in Scotland, I'm reading here.
I attend Church of Scotland regularly. I would say that overall, Julian, the picture in Scotland is similar to that in England.
Well, the latest figures I looked at on that, yes. I mean, again, people ticking the no religion box in Scotland has gone up as well, it would appear.
Now, if I can be clear, my primary belief is that a religious faith, a Christian faith, is ultimately important because it's a matter of personal faith. It's a code for life. But I would also like to remind people that Christianity has for so long shaped our culture in these islands. All parts of the UK, from William Shakespeare to Charles Dickens, Elizabeth Fry, David Livingstone, Eric Liddell, the athlete, John Tavener, the composer. These are just a few of the people who have contributed from the insights of their faith to our natural culture and ethos. And rather, as the bishop suggested, there is an aspect of community which I think we would lose enormously were secularisation to mean that churches closed in little villages as they have, or that cathedrals were closed down.
But why do you necessarily lose the community simply because you lose the religion?
Well, I think the reality is, Julian, that where village pubs have closed and where village shops have closed, churches, albeit I stress I'm not putting churches on the same level as businesses, they are part of the local fabric and they are part of the age-old rite of passage and rite of tradition in so many parts of these islands. And I would like people to pause and think what it will mean if they no longer have the presence of organised Christianity in a major way in the United Kingdom.
Well, I might pose that question before the end of the programme. Thank you, Gus. Susan Deals in Sheffield, an atheist who loves to attend worship at cathedrals, I'm reading here. Susan?
Yes, that's right.
How does that work?
Well, I go in much the same spirit as I would go to a theatre or a concert. I go to the cathedral because it offers the best of what I'm looking for. The beautiful building, the vestment, the candles, the professional organist and the choir. And I also like the language of the old prayer book and the authorised version, so I go to choral evensong when they're used.
How many I suppose you know the answer to this question, but are you conscious of other people who are there for exactly the same reason as you?
It's difficult to know whether there is a large group of us who fall into this category. I do know a few others who are very much the same as me. We don't go every week by any means, but we do go. The only evidence I have as to numbers is that I once, by mistake, went to the evening service during the school holidays when it wasn't choral evensong. It was just evening prayer. And there were only about 15 or 16 people present, whereas the normal evensong congregation would be 50 or 60.
And just out of interest, in that census that I referred to, which box did you tick?
I ticked the box about having no religion.
Oh, right, OK.
I am definitely an atheist. I have no doubts at all about it, and I don't go to church because I have questions. I just go because it's, as I say, a nice spectacle, an experience.
Susan, thank you for the call. You're not the only person to have said that. 03700 100 444 to Shari Val in the phoning room. Shari.
Most definitely not the only person to have said that. In fact, we've had the vast majority of emails have come in from people who are sceptical about the figures, actually. And many emails have suggested that the reason for the increase in church attendance might have something to do with schools. We've had one here from Ralph Williams who says, one reason for the increase in church attendance is the decline in standards at state schools. Parents are therefore wanting their children to go to the faith schools, and to get in they need to attend church. Our local church had low attendance. A new headmaster joined the adjoining faith school. Standards went up at the school. Suddenly the church was full. It was the headmaster, not the vicar, or God what done it, he says. We've had lots and lots. We've had very few emails suggesting that, religion is something we need for the community, except for one or two. One like this from Diana, who says, we all need community, meaning and connection. The root of the word religion is binding together. We still want ritual to mark birth, death and marriage, but when we discuss religion solely in terms of God and belief, we go round and round in ever less interesting circles. She says Buddhism is attractive for the deaf of its psychological insight and emphasis, and the Church of England, with its deep interest in longings and workings of our heart, could revive the beautiful churches. But then we get the completely opposite view from Anne, who says it's time to disestablish religion. A person's religion should be of no interest to anyone else, she says. It's a guilty secret indulgence that people should only perform in private. And finally, this one is actually really rather good. It's come from Emma. She doesn't give her second name. She says, I recently had to enter a church for a school outing with my daughter. I couldn't help thinking that it would be much improved with some comfy sofas, some heating and perhaps a coffee bar at the back. What a lovely place that would be to all meet up on a Sunday morning, and who knows, some good community spirit may emerge. She says, with freezing air, uncomfortable seating and not a sniff of a latte, is it any wonder that it's not the churches but the supermarkets that are more populated on a Sunday morning?
Who'd have thought we'd hear the words sniff of a latte on a phone-in about religion? Professor Linda Woodhead is here, Director of the Religion and Society Programme at Lancaster University. She recently completed a 5-year government-funded academic project mapping religion in society. Welcome. What do you make of today's figures, first of all?
Well, we shouldn't get too excited if we're Anglicans. It's 1 year. There's been huge decline in the Anglican Church since the 1950s. Attendance halved from the 50s to the 80s, and then it halved again from then till now. So 1 year, a swallow doesn't make a summer. It could just be a blip. But it's interesting, nevertheless, and of course the Church is hoping that it shows that long-term decline is starting to bottom out.
I know you were listening to our first group of callers with interest. What did you want to pick out from some of their comments?
Well, I have actually been to churches with latte.
So it does exist.
Very successful mega churches have their own Starbucks concessions, and they're doing very well. There's a point there. It is confusing, this question of how religious we are, because it's a complex picture. Perhaps the simplest way that I can put it on the basis of the surveys that we've done is that when you ask people if they are Anglican or Catholic or Buddhist or whatever, a third of people in this country today say they're Anglican, a third belong to the other churches or religions, and a third say they have no religion. That's roughly how we fall out at the moment. The other thing you can say with certainty is that we are not a secular country, because the numbers who say there's definitely not a God, the numbers of people who are clearly, definitely secular, are around 20%. Then about 30% of people aren't sure, don't know if there's a God or not, and half of people believe that there is a God. That's not a secular society. And as several of the callers pointed out as well, Christianity is absolutely embedded in our wider culture, in our schools, in our hospitals, in our constitution, and in our built landscape, even in our calendar. So in all those senses, it's not true to say we're a secular country. But as you point out, the numbers who say no religion are growing. But that's a bit complex, because it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't believe in God, and some of them call themselves spiritual.
I wanted to ask you as well about the effectiveness of surveys on this subject, because I read something that you wrote about something you call survey-itis, the suggestion being that with something as complex as this, straightforward questions do not necessarily get to the truth.
I was commenting on the census question, where you're just asked about your identity. Would you call yourself an Anglican? The thing about religion is that it's made up of several dimensions. So it's partly about your identity, it's partly what you believe, it's partly what you do, it's ritual, it's partly a community you belong to, and you can ask people about all those things and we fall out rather differently. So you might say you're an Anglican but you don't believe in God, and you sometimes go to the cathedral. We heard some interesting examples of that earlier on. So one question can never capture it.
I wonder as well, I raised this with the Bishop at the start of the programme, people's preparedness to be entirely honest when asked questions about that. I suggested to him that there was a time when saying you were an atheist would be deemed unacceptable. He kind of acknowledged that. I wonder now as well, in some cases, whether saying I am a Christian is sometimes, for some people, a difficult thing to say, because various people take a view of them and their point of view on life as a result of them saying that. That's all part of this story, isn't it?
It is. That doesn't apply to surveys. You're doing that in private on the whole.
True.
But yes, in society, God is the great taboo. You wouldn't talk about God at work. especially not in the BBC, I'm sure this would be the one. This is the one taboo, unacceptable thing to talk about. It'd be more acceptable to come in and talk about your sexual exploits than it would be to talk about God. So there is quite a lot of social stigma about admitting you're religious these days, rather than the opposite. And religion has become rather a toxic word. I think this is partly why a lot of people say they have no religion. If someone said to you, "Oh, there are new neighbours moving in, they're very religious," you'd think, "Oh no." We think dogmatic, scary, that's not something acceptable in our society. I spend my life interviewing people about their beliefs, religious or secular, and people are often quite hesitant. And they'll often talk, when you turn off the tape recorder, they'll say something like, "Well, you might think I'm mad, but I had this experience." It's not something that we find it very easy to talk about.
What about the contrast, maybe it's not a contrast, between being religious and being spiritual? Because you've written, I know, about that, shift, I think is the way you look at it, isn't it?
Mm. Yes, as many people now will say they're spiritual as that they're religious. When we say religious, I think we think about belonging to an institutional religion like the church. Mm. And as I've been saying, that kind of religion has been in decline in this country. But people, on the whole, still feel there must be more meaning to life. There is more than is dreamt of in everyday life. There are standards that really matter. There may be a higher being. So they're not closing themselves off from, if you like, the kind of mysterious dimension of life. And I think they capture something of that when they say they're spiritual, not religious.
I'm just reading a text message about that very subject. Spirituality is not religion, writes Alex. Each person is a spiritual being, though many do not realise this truth. We are everyone an eternal being. Is that the kind of point of view that you hear on that subject specifically?
Yes, but the other side of it is you'd have to say there has been a failure of institutional religion. Those figures of continuing decline. A lot of people feel that the churches aren't welcoming, they're too dogmatic, they're very moralistic, they're being caught up in things like debates about gay marriage, not ordaining women bishops. These things just reinforce that impression that it's more of a narrow sect than an open, broad church that welcomes everyone.
I'll talk about schools and education as well at some point, because that has, Shari mentioned it, I'm seeing various messages to that effect as well. A couple more calls, and I want to bring a couple more guests in before we hear about the world at 1 in half an hour, so I'm setting myself a significant target in the next 4 minutes. Camilla Bike in Inner London. Camilla, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Gillian.
Your experience with a group of teenagers, I think.
Yes, I spend my life interviewing like your last guest, but I only talk to teenagers for a thing called podium.me, and what we do is just ask teenagers what they want to talk about. And I spent the weekend with 500 teenagers camping and all worshipping God for 9:30 in the morning. It was like a rave. I'd never seen anything like it. And these kids were cool. And a lot of them didn't even come from Christian families. And that really surprised me, that there were young people who give up that bank holiday weekend to go and dance and sing songs to God and go and do outreach in the community just because they wanted to.
You say just because they wanted to. Were you able to explore that further? And what were their backgrounds?
I asked them a lot of questions.
Go on.
Why are you doing this? And there were lots of different reasons. There were kids there that had gone through traumatic times. Perhaps they'd been self-harming, and then they'd asked a lot of questions, and the church had supported them and helped them through school difficulties. Maybe they joined a youth group, and they've been given answers. And also, a lot of them want to do practical things. They're growing up in a world where there's a lot more poverty. There's food banks. There's a lot more homeless people, and they're very, very bold. And I watched them go out on the streets on Saturday. They took minibuses of them off with their own ideas, and said, "We want to go and buy McDonald's for the homeless." And
okay.
They went off and did it.
Camilla, stay there. I want to bring in Paula McGarry in Tyneside, because I see the word disenchanted, Paula, next to your byline, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the basis of what you have just heard.
Well, that's very impressive. I think that's wonderful that you can get so many people together. The reasons aren't clear, though, how you got them there, and
Well, they all belong to youth groups all around the UK, and yes. This was a campsite, that was set up for them with a speaker in the morning and very practical talks. It was kind of, how do you deal with, people bullying you in your school, yes. Just generally, not because of your faith, but, how do you deal with that?
Camilla,
how do you deal with social media, all that stuff?
Camilla, bear with me. I just want to hear why Paula is disenchanted.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right, don't worry.
Mainly because I think there's so much negative coming out of the church all over. You hear about money laundering, you hear about paedophilia, which doesn't seem to have been addressed effectively. And it's almost as if it's like one rule for those up there and another one for us.
Am I right in saying that you used to have a faith and now you don't because of some of those issues?
I still have a faith, but the church, I feel, isn't doing enough, especially in my area locally.
Where do you live?
So I live in Chester Street, actually.
In Tyne Weir, yeah.
What would you like the church to be doing for you? Sorry, I don't want to take up your job, Julia.
That's all right. I'll allow you a moment.
What would you like the church to be doing? What would really meet your needs?
I'd like them to be more inviting.
That's interesting, because some clearly are saying they are more inviting, but for you, Paula, clearly they're not.
I don't know if you knew, Julian, there are new churches starting all over the place, people planting out other churches getting to a certain size, and someone saying, actually, I want to go and start another one, I know someone's just about to start one in Croydon and someone else starting one in, up in the north, and people just, they see a need and think, I want to go into something practical, and often they don't even have a building.
All right, Camilla, thank you. Paula, thank you as well. Let me bring in Andrew Copson, Chief Executive of the British Humanist Association. Thoughts on what you've heard so far, Andrew?
Oh, well, we've heard so much. I think the first thing I'd like to say is that we should correct this idea that somehow the figures from the Church of England today represent some sort of significant increase in church attendance. You said a couple of times that this is an increase in church attendance. Actually,
No,
it's
fallen a little bit, I
Yeah,
say.
it has, that's right. 0.3% it's fallen. And even the number of people going at Christmas, which you said earlier has increased on last year, that's still decreased over the last 10 years or so. So we are still looking at a pattern of decline. And just looking at the simple percentages of the population that we're talking about 2% of people going to church on the average week. That's 98% of people who aren't. So I think that to try and make some sort of very big issue out of these figures would be quite wrong. And even at Christmas, we're talking about 95% of people not going. And as you've already said, many of the people who are going may well be non-believers. So I think that we need to keep this to some extent in proportion.
No, well, that's part of the reason we invited you on.
Of course, I'm very grateful.
If they are falling,
yes,
is that something you celebrate? I mean, how do you react to that?
Well, I wouldn't celebrate it. I mean, I think it gives cause to question how a church that has such small proportions of the population as members of it, really the same sort of numbers as are members of the Roman Catholic Church, why such a church should continue to have a very privileged political and legal status as the established church. So I think there's a political point about, these figures that should make us question why, in the absence of popular support, a church like the Church of England should continue to have its privileged status in our law and constitution, control of many of our state-funded schools, as you pointed out earlier. But I think more generally, the interesting thing is to look not at statistics about church attendance, but statistics about where people get a sense of meaning today, where they find their community, how much they're contributing to society. And we see there that large proportions of people, larger than ever before, are volunteering in their communities. 70%, for example, in the national survey last week showed 70% of people volunteering in their community, that people are finding their meaning in their relationships with their fellow human beings, with reference to the natural world around them, with a sense of purpose in life that comes from adopting worthwhile goals. And I think this business about church attendance or religious beliefs is a sideshow, is a distraction from what's actually going on in people's inner lives today, which is that, religion is irrelevant to their sense of meaning, to their values, to their community feeling, to their morality.
Andrew, I'll come back to you for more in the second half. I'll also bring Mona Siddiqui in, who I know has been listening to us in Edinburgh, more from Linda Woodhead as well. But just for a moment, Martha Carney with News of the World at 1. Martha.
Julian, on today's programme, I've been talking to the former Chancellor Lord Lawson about why he now thinks the UK should leave the European Union. Also today, we'll have the latest from Cleveland, Ohio, where 3 women who've been missing for many years have been found alive. And we'll hear from Staffordshire, where a memorial to the Bevan boys who worked in coal mines during World War II has been dedicated this morning. That's all coming up in the World at 1 in half an hour.
Martha, thank you very much. 03700 100 444, the phone number, text to 84844, emails via the Radio 4 website. You just heard from Andrew Copson from the British Humanist Association. Still with me, Professor Linda Woodhead, Director of the Religion and Society Programme at Lancaster University. I mentioned as well that Mona Siddiqui has been listening, Professor of Islamic Studies at the University of Edinburgh. Mona Siddiqui, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What points do you want to pick out of what you've just heard? Clearly we've been concentrating principally on the Church of England because those are the figures that we are effectively latching onto for today's discussion, but it goes much more widely than that. What do you pick out?
I think that religion has lost its connective. It still has its connective and collective attraction. But I wanted to quote Charles Taylor on this, because he said that society is now one in which faith, even for the staunchest believer, is just one possibility amongst others. And I think that's a radical shift in our consciousness about the way we view religion. Institutional religion, I think, has probably declined across the religions, even amongst the minority religions. But there is a difference that in many religions, religious ritual is bound up with a deeper sense of cultural identity. And I think one of the things that we're hearing about the Anglican Church is if numbers have declined in people who are going, or have steadily been declining in church attendance, does that necessarily mean that people have lost a sense of their religious consciousness? If you ask people, do you have faith in God? It's a very different question to, do you go to church? Or are you a practicing Christian? And people at different stages of their life, I think, have different needs within their own religious parameters. We heard one of your commentators saying that she goes to church far more than she did when she was younger. And I wanted to pick up on one thing that Linda said about, one of your callers said about young people. I don't think young people don't talk about religion, but I think that young people see religion as something that limits you, as something that doesn't allow you freedom. And I'm not talking about those who are quite evangelical and who are church-going, but the broad spectrum of young people, teenagers, who do see religion as something that, what does it offer you? And I hear these conversations quite often. Everything that you say is good about your religion. Well, you can have that without having to have necessarily a religious belief. So in some ways, those of us who are in the kind of religious business are always looking for, what meaning, what distinctive story does religion tell that other areas of society are not telling? But what is distinct about religion?
Those young people's attitudes that you mentioned are interesting. Is what you're getting at the idea that for some young people, they see religion, and again putting that in quotes, as being something that tells them what they cannot do rather than what they can do?
Yes, I think so. I think they see religion as limiting your freedom. Religion, if I talk about Muslim or Jewish children, religion is limiting your dietary intake. Religion is not letting you be who you are. Religion is something that your parents control you with. And it's actually very difficult. We've had the word meaning said quite a few times. You don't just find meaning in communities. You have to actually find what meaning does having faith in God give me at all in life. And I think for a lot of people, for a lot of young people, and I would say especially in the minority religions, they do have a sense that, yes, having faith in God does give meaning, but it's all the extras that come with any institutional religion that seems to be falling by the wayside.
Linda, do you want to pick up on that before I go back to the phones, and I'll bring Andrew Copson again?
Yeah, Mona makes a great point. I think people really underestimate how much religion has changed since about 1989. I think it's changed out of all recognition. Maybe it's changed more than it has before since the Reformation in the last several hundred years, in that people don't want a package anymore where you go and you get the whole works in one place, all put together, your ethics, your belief, your ritual, and that's your whole identity. We're a very different society. We're much more highly educated. Women are in a much more prominent position. We're used to more choice. We're used to making up our own minds. It doesn't mean we're not religious, but we're not religious in the old style. We're religious in new and different ways.
Which is interesting, because there was that thesis, wasn't there, that said that as societies become more modern and more developed, they become less religious.
Yeah, not true. Look at...
I suspect Andrew Copson would disagree with you on that. You say first, and Andrew, I'll come to you in a second. Brief answer to that, Linda, and then I'll come to you, Andrew.
Well, it's not true. Europe's the most secular part of the world, but other very modern societies, like the USA, for example, have never shown that trend.
Andrew Copson.
Well, church attendance is declining in the United States. And the general idea of secularisation, that as societies become more modern, more educated, more, all the things that we associate with modernity, that institutional religion will lose its power, is clearly true. I don't think anyone would dissent with that. I don't think Linda's actually dissenting from that proposition either. Institutional religion clearly has lost its power with the advent of modernity. I agree with a lot of what Linda says about the way people, search for values and meaning and purpose in a sort of disorganised way these days, in a pick and mix way, and I value that in many ways. But what I disagree with Linda is that we should call that religion. I think that's confusing to call the sort of different attributions of meaning to experience that different individuals have today in our society.
Call it spirituality then.
Well, I mean, that word, of course, is if you Google that, you come up with all sorts. I mean, it means anything to everyone.
Well, I did suggest that to Linda before we came on air, actually. I mean, there was a quote put to her, I think, in an interview suggesting that it might become superstition and, quote, wishy-washy guff.
Yes, I mean, I prefer to talk about the values people have, the sense of meaning that they have in their lives, and the connections that they feel to other people and to the world around them, and also to the sense of community they might have. All those things, they are not places that, we don't get those from religion today in this country.
Right, I must go back to the telephones then. I know you all want to have another say. You will, rest assured. Ski Solomon's in Reading. Ski, good afternoon.
Hello, yes. I'm the rabbi in Reading, the Orthodox rabbi. And it's something that I found very interesting, what Andrew was saying, that people aren't interested in organised religion. I would say that they are, but in a different way. And there's a kind of smorgasbord effect going on. We're much more liberated generally. And I think that as individuals, we tend to make what we find convenient or useful for ourselves. And therefore, people, they shop around a lot.
A sort of pick and mix approach.
Somewhat, yes. But they're still very interested. And for example, those at my current synagogue in Reading and in Liverpool, where I was before, there's a lot of religious tourism. There's a lot of interest, particularly because of the RE syllabus, because of the cultural diversity of the country as well. And I think the interest in religion and an increasing interest in religion is what I find. It extends even to humanists, Andrew. I find that humanists are fascinated by religion. They just don't believe in a god.
Andrew, are you fascinated by it?
Not at all.
No,
I mean, I think that's a pretty blanket. I mean, that's a
say.
pretty blanket claim. I mean, there's lots of claims being made without any evidence here at all, any sort of evidence to back them up.
Here because,
quite anecdotal.
Because there's a smuggling in of these words. Pick and mix and smorgasbord suggests something incredibly trivial like picking out sweets. I mean, in the rest of society, we think it's good that people think about things and make their own reflective choices. The fact that people now choose what beliefs and practices and religion they have doesn't mean that it's trivial to them.
Linda, I certainly didn't use that phrase to trivialise.
No, I did. I'll put my hand up.
It's not a trivialisation at all. It's a sign that there's a lot of options available to people today to think about, and that is a good thing.
Mona Siddiqui.
I think... Yeah, I just wanted to actually pick up on what Andrew's saying, that what we are forgetting, at least in Western societies, is that the political language is that of liberalism. And liberalism speaks a language of rights. So the individual is at the centre of this worldview. That means you can recognise and celebrate individual choice and individual identity. And individual choice and individual identity are bound up with the kind of areas of your religious faith that you feel you can identify with. And that's where I think we are seeing a new era of religious consciousness, and I'm not necessarily referring to what I think, and this is my own thesis, that I think liberal religion has failed. Actually, that's why younger people who are being drawn to religion, and I don't mean across the board, but there is a sense that a lot of younger people are being drawn to religion, are being drawn to a more conservative form of this religion, and this is something that I find rather curious, that liberalism did not necessarily breed more liberalism when it came to religious faith. There's been a backtracking of it, or people have just given up on religion completely.
Let me get back to the
polarisation, I believe, as well. And this is, I mean, people have been saying that they would go for less religion ever since the Enlightenment in the end of the 18th century. And I think these things come in waves. And I'm just about to organise on the 26th of May an event called Limud in Thames Valley, where there's a huge number of options that people can choose to learn about aspects of either of Jewish history or Jewish life or Judaism. And people make their own choices. And really what I'm saying is people are making their own choices, and it's up to people like me, Orthodox rabbis and Reform and other rabbis, to offer choices to people.
Okay,
and I think that's why people come to those synagogues.
Thank you very much for the call. Back to the phone room. Shari Val. Shari.
It's extraordinary the number of emails we've had, lots and lots of them, still people saying surely people are only being baptised and going to church because they want to get their kids into faith schools. However, we have also had reflections on what Mona Siddiqui was talking about. Jonathan Smith says it's just tragic today that people still feel that they must help others because it's their religious duty and not because they have a desire to be a decent human being. It seems the unfounded fear of what happens when we die still appears to be the only way to motivate people to behave in a caring society. But we've also had quite a lot of sceptics contacting us, the majority in fact. Tim says that the Church's message has been toxic for this country in our history. Greater education has shown that the myth that people need religion to be more moral or ethical, people are increasingly aware that people are moral and ethical despite religion rather than because of it. The Church stands for greed, deceit, abuse and corruption. More and more people are embracing rationalism. We may not understand everything, but we can acknowledge our ignorance and combat it. But we've also had one from David Fox who says the decline in religion in this country may be levelling off, but its interest remains pretty low. Most people in my experience, even those who describe themselves as Anglican or Catholic or whatever, realise in their heart of hearts that it's all nonsense on stilts. It's quite ridiculous that we still allow C of E and Roman Catholic faith schools to institutionally misogynistic and homophobic organisations to run so many of our schools, not to mention the anti-democratic nonsense of bishops in the House of Lords. And in fact, lots of people mention bishops in the House of Lords. However, the other side, David Hollis says church-going is entrenched in tradition for weddings, funerals, Christmas, etc. He says, my kids go to a Christian private school, but I myself am a non-believer. I value the morals of the church. This is where it does have something to offer. Religion is, after all, a metaphor for life and death. Now, I don't know whether you can cope with a joke, Julian.
I normally can.
On the back of the lady who said there wasn't a sniff of a latte in the church, Anna Powell has contacted us and she says about the suggestion of serving coffee in the church, and this isn't hopefully going to insult anybody, wouldn't that then be the Church of the Latter Day Saints?
Oh, very good. Very good. Thank you. I'm glad you billed that as funny in advance because I think it worked. Linda Woodhead is here. I just want to ask you, Linda, about this issue about schools because you highlighted it a moment ago. It's coming up a lot. There is a theory out there that says a lot of people are going to church and saying we believe to make sure they get their children to a better school.
And this must be true. But then why is this? I mean, you can be very cynical and say it's just because these schools are better. Why are they better? It's got something to do with their general ethos and the values, their Christian values. People want their kids to be exposed to that. And that may well be something to do with the sense that we want to bring our children up in that kind of way, with that sort of identity. So it actually may say something rather more positive about we actually don't want these things to disappear from our culture. If faith schools were such a terrible thing, no one would care and they wouldn't be enrolling in them.
Andrew Copson.
It's just not true. When you ask parents why they send their children, if they send their children to church schools, when you ask them why, most of them say it's academic attainment or discipline. Hardly any of them say that it's the ethos.
But they know it's to do with the ethos,
Well,
Andrew.
why would they? Why
else
aren't
would
they
it be
saying
faith
it then?
schools?
Well, because I'll tell you, faith schools that aren't academically successful aren't popular with parents. Parents don't send their children to them. If it was for the religious ethos, as you're arguing, then why wouldn't they send their children to those schools in spite of their academic poor performance?
No, I'm saying it's an inseparable thing.
No, we've seen again and again and again that ethos is totally irrelevant to attainment in church schools.
That's not true.
What's relevant? Yes, it is.
It's not. It's true. Across Europe, those schools do better.
Absolutely. No, that's not true. There's completely different basis for comparison outside of England. For a start, in England, almost all church schools
but
are
Andrew,
state-funded
you wouldn't
schools,
want to
and
bring
they
your child up in a
off.
system of values that you thought was repulsive, would you? So it does indicate that there's a broad acceptance of those values.
Look, the opposite of thinking that Church of England values are wonderful is not that you think that they're repulsive. That's a false dichotomy that you're straw man that you're setting up there. I'm not saying that they're repulsive values. I'm simply saying that when you say that parents send their children to church schools for the values, you're not correct. What they send their children to those schools for is because they have academic success, and they have academic success because they have academic success because they're selective.
OK, you two are not going to agree on that. Let me bring Mona Siddiqui in on it as well.
Well, I mean, this discussion is almost going towards the line of that religion has some monopoly on moral values. It certainly doesn't. We see goodness in people and we recognise goodness in people irrespective of their background, religion or culture. I do think Andrew's probably right. I mean, I don't know the research here, but in just terms of the discussion here, I think most parents I've talked to, wherever they've sent their children to school, have done it on the basis of academic credibility and academic results. It may help that the school has a moral ethos, but moral ethos else has to be bound up with a discipline. The school doesn't have discipline. How does it reflect its moral ethos? So I don't think saying that a faith school in itself breeds good results is very convincing.
I'm going to go back to the phones because a lot of people want to get on, and I'm conscious of the time. Rob Elmer is in Liverpool. Rob, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
An atheist who goes to church, I'm reading here.
That's exactly right. Yes, I'm one of the 20% who profoundly does not believe in God, and yet I do go to church. The way it happened was that I originally just had to go along there to support my children who were in the boys' brigade, and they took part in the services. And up until then, I'd kind of believed that the church was hypocritical. One of your correspondents said a toxic influence on society. And when I got there, I was very surprised to find a life-affirming, very inclusive, non-judgmental bunch of people.
But it hasn't made you believe, Rob?
No, gosh, no. I mean, somebody said that if God didn't exist, somebody'd have to make him up, and I firmly believe that's exactly what happens. But on the other hand, I do think that the teachings of Jesus Christ and Christian values are very sound and very relevant to today.
It's interesting. Interesting to hear that perspective. Thank you for the call. Lorraine Ferris is in Harrogate. Lorraine, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Your point here.
I think you need to look at the statistics again and reanalyse, because I think that taxpayers are partially funding the resurgence of church through church schools. In my area, I've observed many people who've never expressed the least interest in religion. They start going to church when their first child's born, because there's a very highly rated C of E comprehensive in our area, and the same people become very involved, becoming deacons and bell ringers and all kinds of things, because you get more points for that for school admission. It makes me very angry, because my daughter, as a daughter of an atheist, can't gain access to the best school in town. And surely all taxpayers should have equal access to taxpayer-funded services. I think that the churches are using tax funding as a form of marketing tool to get more people, more bums on seats.
Well, it sounds as if Andrew Copson's going to agree with you. I won't go back to that debate again, because I feel we've kind of been there and done that. But thank you for making the point, Lorraine. Tim's on his mobile. Tim, good afternoon.
I'm on the landline now, actually.
Well, congratulations. You've moved since you last... we called you anyway. What do you like to say?
Oh, I'm feeling as though I've stumbled into an episode of The Moral Maze, frankly. I think there is a difference here, and I say this from experience of having attended many, many churches, that actually in society today, organised religion, as you would... And we're quoting the Church of England here, but because that's the best-known example of organised religion, is that we moved away from the organisation bit to the disorganised bit. In fact, actually, the church now concentrates on matters of the heart and not on the matters of the head. In other words, we judge by what, the way our heart is in relation to our faith, as opposed to the way that, we express it through our deeds. People don't make any, notion of the fact that what we do, that whether it makes us religious or not, we are human beings, and we all, whether you are humanist or right, and as Christians I fully accept his right, your humanist contributors' right to disbelieve, in the fact that it's a relationship between you and whatever. And that's when people come to church, you're not trying to convert them, you're trying to offer them an option. Whether they seek to take it is entirely a matter for the person attending whatever religious church or religious denomination they wish to, whether they accept that personal relationship with whatever they call to God or a force. The thing is that actually I think the reason that the Church of England and organised religion fell out of focus and out of favour is the fact that the message or the methodology of the message became irrelevant.
What about the point raised by Andrew Copson that still the numbers, if you break them down, represent a very small minority of people who regularly go to church, yet still this organisation carries a huge amount of influence in the way British life is run?
I would probably agree with him.
What are bishops doing in the House of Lords, for example?
That's a historical one, and I think there are forces of the Almighty greater than I am that need to decide that one. I'm a mere humble advocate.
Mona Siddiqui, come in on that issue of bishops in the House of Lords, because again, a bit like faith schools, it's cropping up a lot on the screen I'm looking to my right.
Well, it would be nice to know what their, and I don't mean this in any kind of facetious sense, but what their actual contribution is when there are debates. We often hear, such and such a person never having contributed to a debate in the House of Lords in the last year or 2 years. And my own feeling is that if you are going to give any privilege to people of religious backgrounds, yes, there are historical reasons for this, then I think it has to be slightly more transparent. And that's a different argument from having no faith representation at all.
Tim, thank you for the call. Anne's in Haywards Heath. You've been waiting a while, Anne. Good afternoon. Hello, Anne. Can you hear us?
Hello.
Yes. On you go.
I'm sorry. I thought you'd given up. What I wanted to say was that I'm not sure that I want to concentrate on religion. I thought it was our spirituality that people actually are attending more churches for. In the past, it was rather common that people had to go to church and it was forced on them, but it's not forced on people today. And I'm really, as I was listening just now, I was so pleased to think that I went to school at a time when we were all taught about Christianity, not in a big way or an oppressive way, because of the impact it's had on my whole life and on my family's life. And churches today that are the most rapidly growing ones are the ones that are reaching out to the whole family, where there is coffee served and cakes, and that they are not only very important spiritual places to be, but they are fun places to be.
OK, and let me bring Andrew Copson in on that. Just to react to that point specifically, Andrew.
Which one?
This idea of the churches that are growing are the ones that make the experience a generally enriching one. And
well, I don't know whether that's true or not. I don't know what the evidence is for that. But I can see that if that were true, then of course there's a very good reason for it, which is that people do want community. People do like community. And in society today, whether it's the decline of public funding for secular community spaces or the collapse of other things like miners' welfare or other sorts of civic amenities, then there is an increasing a reduction in the number of places that people can go for community. Now, most people still go for their community to non-religious spaces and places, don't get me wrong, but I can certainly see that if there are some churches that are growing against the pattern of general decline, then, it would be those ones that are opening themselves up to as a community resource. I mean, we've got a lot of nice church buildings in this country.
And you like them, presumably. You visit them.
Do I visit them? I visit the ones that are occasionally that are sort of interesting to look at. I don't visit the sort of more modern ones. I visit them when I'm invited to give talks or do
very
debates,
briefly.
Usually.
It's not just the very community focused or family focused churches that are doing well. Right. Something else that's doing really well are big spectacles, big festivals, ritual. Pilgrimages. When the Pope comes to visit, people like to turn out for these big things. Lords, those kinds of very ritual-focused things are doing rather well as well, and things that kind of recall us to a more medieval heritage.
I'm conscious of the time. Mona Siddiqui, let me give you the last word in about 30 seconds, if you would, as to where we go from here, what we've learnt today, what the future might hold.
30 seconds is far too long.
That wasn't fair, was it, then?
I was just going to say there are fewer events now that actually bring church and nation together. So actually institutional religion is on the decline because of that as well. But I still think that institutional religion and going to church is a very kind of Anglican way of estimating religious values, religious sensitivities. That's not the best way, I think, to understand people's faith in God.
Thank you all very much for being a part of the programme today. Thanks to Linda Woodhead, to Mona Siddiqui, to Andrew Copson, to you for calling. Apologies, as ever, if you tried and didn't get on the air. That's it for today. Winifred's here tomorrow at 4 minutes past midday.
Call You and Yours was presented by Julian Warwicker. It was produced in Salford by Marie Devine. And you can find out more about the subjects covered in the programme on the You and Yours website at bbc.co.uk/Radio 4. Just before 1 o'clock, it's time for a check on the weather, and in the studio today is John Hammond.
Thanks very much, and very good afternoon. Well, it's a beautiful day across virtually the whole of the UK. Temperatures are already up to around 22 degrees in one or two spots, and we can add a couple of degrees to that, so a few places will reach 24, possibly 25 in one or two isolated locations. It's not sunny everywhere. There are a few regional variations. I'll start with England and Wales, and we've had an area of cloud and patchy light rain spreading up across parts of Kent and into Essex, other parts of East Anglia, and now journeying across the East Midlands. This rain will turn increasingly patchy, and many places will avoid a shower, but there is the risk of one or two isolated downpours developing later on this afternoon across parts of northern England and eventually southern Scotland. But most of the UK will stay fine and dry with plenty of strong sunshine. The good news at long last is that northwestern parts of Scotland are cheering up after what's been rather drab few days. Still some fog around the Murray coast, and up across the Northern Isles it stays rather grey and misty with a bit of patchy drizzle. Consequently, it's cooler here and around any of the coasts where you've got a breeze coming in off the